All right, welcome to WSQ number 12. Today we're going to be talking about respiration. And basically this is kind of the piggyback to what we learned about in our last WSQ, talking about photosynthesis, which was the process by which autotrophs make energy. And today we're going to talk on the other side about heterotrophs and how respiration is used. So a couple objectives. We're going to talk about what events occurred during respiration, so the multiple stages. We're also going to talk about something called fermentation, and ultimately we want to understand better how is respiration needed by us, and how is it used by organisms and living things. So let's jump right into it. We're going to first of all talk about, we need to understand the difference between cellular respiration and respiration. Okay, cellular respiration is what we're talking about. Okay, so we are focusing on cellular respiration. Okay, cellular respiration is the process by which cells obtain energy by breaking down food particles, food molecules, usually in the form of sugar, to release the energy that those particles contain. So cellular energy, I'm going to show you in a second, we'll kind of draw that together, where that comes from. Okay, regular respiration or lung respiration, or we also call the process of breathing. Respiration is when you breathe in and out of your lungs. So understand that we're talking about cellular respiration, okay, not just general respiration. Now, we need to start today by understanding something. And what we need to understand, let me go to a different color. We're going to go to blue today. What we need to understand is before we can get energy, okay, because if we think about this process of the body, so here I am, here's me. Oh, my stick drawings are fabulous. They're amazing. Okay, here I am. Before we can get energy, we need energy, right? We need energy to survive. And energy gets into our body through food, right? So in that food, we have locked up, okay, all kinds of energy. We'll take the example of sugar, C6H12O6. Now inside that sugar molecule are bonds. So if I were to draw the sugar molecule, it would actually look like there'd be carbon atoms connected together like this. And then connected to the carbon atoms would be oxygen atoms and hydrogen atoms. And this is not exactly correct. I'm just showing you, okay? Now, every line in this model represents a bond, okay? And those bonds, it takes energy to hold the oxygen and the carbon together. It takes energy to hold the hydrogen and carbon together. That's the energy that we want to get at. So cellular respiration is the process by which cells obtain that energy by breaking these bonds and liberating the energy when they break them, and then that energy can be used by the cell to go ahead and do the processes that it needs. That's what we're talking about. How our body takes food, which is stored energy, right? And it was stored by the plants, by the animals, okay, depending on what we're eating, and converts that, breaks the bonds so that we can get out of it the energy we need to be able to survive. That's what we're talking about today, okay? So let's talk about the process. There are two stages of cellular respiration that we need to know. Stage one of cellular respiration is in the cytoplasm. So what's happened is we have to go back to where it began before we even get into cellular respiration. Remember, we're talking about that, cellular. Okay. What we start with before stage one up here, we have the regular process of digestion. So what happens in your body, let's take the path of food. All right. And again, let me just draw my beautiful drawings. I know you guys love them. Oh, my eyes are not very nice. Here we go. So here I am. All right. Need some hair. This is my comb over. So what happens is, I need a neck. If I eat some food, so let's say I'm going to eat my little hamburger over here. Wow, that's a perfect hamburger. Doesn't that look tasty? All right. When I eat that hamburger, what happens? The hamburger goes into my mouth, and I start out, what I do first is I chew, okay? This is the first stage in digestion. Chewing breaks up the food particles into smaller particles than they were at first. Then that food's going to go into my stomach, and it's going to go through the process of digestion. It's going to go through mechanical digestion. My stomach's going to churn, and it's going to mix it with bile. It's going to start to break down. In my mouth, it was already starting to break down carbohydrates. Once it gets into my digestive system, it's going to break down the proteins and the fats. Ultimately, it's going to go into my bloodstream, okay, through my intestines. It's going to get into the bloodstream. And so what ends up happening is what we get as a result of digestion is the simplest form of energy, which is glucose. So down here in stage 1, the glucose enters into the cell, okay, it gets into the cytoplasm. And what happens is in the cell, it's broken down into smaller and smaller molecules, okay? And as it comes in right away, as it's broken down, you have some small amounts of energy that are just released right here in the cytoplasm as it breaks down. So the first stage, you get small levels of energy released. The stage 2, then that sugar molecule is going to actually go into the mitochondrion. In the mitochondria, what happens is those smaller sugar molecules will actually combine with oxygen and water, combine with oxygen to produce water and carbon dioxide. There's this reaction, this chemical reaction that happens. And one of the big issues that comes from it is a large amount of energy. So what you have coming in, what we start with, the reactants of this process, okay? So if you remember that word, reactants means what's going in. So the reactants of cellular respiration would be glucose or sugar, right? Plus, okay, what else do we need? Oxygen. Ooh, that's a great Y. And what do we get? What do we get? The result, okay, is what we're going to get is energy plus carbon dioxide plus water, okay, H2O. All right? Okay, so here's the cellular respiration equation. We just drew it out. Here's the reality of it. And notice, if you are very attentive at all, you'll recognize that this is almost exactly the flip of photosynthesis. So what do you have? The reactants are sugar plus oxygen. Here's my reactants, which we're going to talk about here. Right? And my products over here will be carbon dioxide, water, plus the release of energy as those bonds of the sugar molecule are broken down. Okay, so the equation reads sugar plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So the reactants are sugar and oxygen. The products are carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay, and it's not really light energy. That's actually just energy. But this energy originated with light because all energy ultimately started with the sun. Okay, so respiration equation, C6H12O6, sugar, glucose, plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Now, let's look at the connection between the two. I said it, let's look at it. So think of photosynthesis and respiration as opposites. So in photosynthesis, look what happens. In the chloroplast of a plant cells which are, let's remind ourselves, autotrophs, right? That means they make their own food. The sun's energy shines down, gets absorbed by the pigment, the chlorophyll that's in the chloroplast. And what happens is you get carbon dioxide, water, plus the sunlight, yields sugar and oxygen. Okay, that's what happens in photosynthesis. Plants use carbon dioxide. Plants use the carbon dioxide in the water, and they release oxygen, and they make sugar to store. Well, notice the difference. In respiration, we start with sugar and oxygen. Does this look familiar? We start with sugar and oxygen, and our products are carbon dioxide and water. Okay. Notice the play here. Okay, what did the plant needed? It started with carbon dioxide and water, and it came out with sugar and oxygen. In the mitochondria in the animal cell, okay, in the that organism, you actually saw sugar and oxygen was starting, and that produced carbon dioxide and water. So it's cyclical. We'll see this cycle that happens over and over again. One last thing to talk about today is fermentation. What you need to understand is that typically cellular respiration is the best way for us to make energy. In fact, it's the most efficient. You'll get the most energy in cellular respiration. But sometimes cells are not actually don't have oxygen and aren't able to do it. Because remember, if you don't have oxygen, you can't do cellular respiration, right? Because oxygen is necessary for the process. Oxygen combines with the sugar, breaks the sugar apart, and that's where you get your energy and your carbon dioxide and your water. So in this case, sometimes there isn't any oxygen, and there's also a process called fermentation where it can actually do the same thing, produce energy without using oxygen. Two types: alcoholic fermentation. This is when yeast or other single-celled organisms actually break down the sugars themselves. If you've ever taken sugar and put it into, if you've made bread or something like that and you put yeast in it, yeast is an active live culture. It will actually break down the sugars. That's why you put sugar into your bread dough and things like that. Okay. The byproduct of this process, if you've ever smelled bread, it's got that yeasty smell. That smell is actually the byproduct of the process. It's alcohol. Okay. And this happens. We see alcoholic fermentation in the making of wine, in the making of beer, things like that, where we're actually having yeast organisms that are breaking down the sugars in that particular plant, and alcohol is the byproduct, and people make lots of money selling it. And sadly, people, become alcoholics and stuff. Lactic acid fermentation is when animals break down sugars without oxygen. If you've ever played a sport and you're really exerting yourself and you push yourself to a point and you get really sore, that soreness is actually due to the lactic acid, okay, that's built up inside of your muscle bellies, and it literally pains your muscles. That is lactic acid fermentation. And the lactic acid is the byproduct of us doing respiration in what's called an anaerobic means. So typically, cellular respiration is aerobic, which literally means with oxygen. Okay? In fermentation, we have something that's called anaerobic, which is without oxygen. So in cellular respiration, we have an aerobic. There's oxygen. It can break things down. It's very efficient. In fermentation, it's anaerobic. There's no oxygen, and so it's not very efficient. So you've watched WSQ number 12. I know that one was a little bit longer. Make sure you summarize and question, put it on the haiku page, and I'll see you guys later.